If it wasn't clear from the president's formation of a commission on the Supreme Court that he announced last week, it's crystal clear now. Democrats want to pack the court, or at least threaten to do so. And why? Well, we're going to talk about that today. Democratic lawmakers introducing legislation that would add 4 new justices to the Supreme Court, just the number they need, by the way, to create a 7-6 liberal majority. They couldn't even wait for the president's new commission of mostly liberal scholars to formally issue a conclusion along those lines, as most expect they will. Here's more of what the Senate Republican leader had to say this morning.
One survey late last year showed that a clear majority of Americans oppose packing the Supreme Court. But the farthest left activists aren't interested in the common good. They want power. And the same Democrats and the same corporate media that spent the last 4 years hyperventilating and declaring a new constitutional crisis was underway every 30 seconds seem to be perfectly content to play along.
Well, joining me now to talk about this and more is Kansas Senator Roger Marshall, who yesterday on the Senate floor made his maiden speech. Senator, welcome to the program.
Tony, it's good to be back on with you. It's been too long, and we got a lot to talk about. What do you want to start with today?
Well, there is a lot. Let's talk first about this court packing scheme that we're hearing from Democrats earlier this afternoon. Nancy Pelosi actually saying she won't go along with the progressives. But what's really at play here?
Well, Tony, this is a power grab. You know, just think about it. We've had 9 Supreme Court justices, I believe, since 1879. And 9 has been just fine, but the Democrats are upset that some might say that we have a 5-to-4 ratio of conservatives to liberals on the Supreme Court. And I think that's probably a stretch, as you know, based upon some of their votes, to call some of these folks conservatives on the Supreme Court. But so they can't win by the rules, so they're going to change the rules. They're going to grab power. And you know, one, the first test of leadership is that you don't try to grab more power when you have the opportunity to do that. So for our folks who think that the sanctity of life is important, that our Second Amendment is important, or that our freedoms of speech and religion are important, that's where we would end up, is losing those by they would pass unconstitutional laws. So the Democrats would pass unconstitutional laws. And then if they pack this court with liberal judges, then they won't have the guts to say that, oh, no, this is unconstitutional. We're going to make your private church school hire a transgender person to be your PE teacher, you know, those types of things. So we got to get fired up about this one.
You know, Dr. Marshall, I know your father was a police chief, and so you've been around law enforcement, been around the criminal mind. And oftentimes, and I use that intentionally, because what I see here, in part, is a threat. It is a threat. It's kind of like aiming a loaded gun at someone, threatening them with it. It can go off. But I think what this is it's almost hostage taking, because they're saying, I think what they're communicating is, look, if you don't pass H.R. 1, this federal takeover of elections, if you don't allow us to push through the Equality Act, which would torpedo religious freedom, we're going to eliminate the Senate legislative filibuster, and we're going to pack the court. So it's like they're hanging this over your heads to force you to go along with what they want.
Exactly, and even to go further with the criminal mind, and it's hard for me to think like this, but they're holding it over the current 9 Supreme Court justices as well. Mm-hmm. That if they don't change their ways, if they don't conform to the liberal policies, by golly, we're going to add 4 more people as well. So you're right. This is part of the power grab, and the left just overreaching, which is it just blows me away. Joe Biden said he would be a moderate, but he has a very extreme liberal radical agenda, and we're seeing it play out right before our eyes.
Well, and what you just stated is not speculation. It actually is rooted in history, because that's exactly what FDR did. He wanted to pack the court with enough justices to give him a liberal majority, because the conservative majority had been undermining his big, expansive government plans. But what we saw happen after Congress, basically dismissed his effort to pack the court, we saw the court trend more liberal as a result of that. They do respond to these political threats. No doubt, I think that is a part of why we see the Chief Justice making some of the decisions that he's been making.
Obviously, I mean, they're humans as well. They're going to read the newspapers. They see where the pressure is coming, and they're trying to represent the values of America. But, Tony, this is why your job, my job, is so important. I still believe that you and I represent the values of the super majority of Americans. And we have the tail wagging the dog right now. I still believe that most Americans believe in the same values that you and I were raised on. That the sanctity of life, on our God-given values of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all those things that you and I were raised on. And the Supreme Court should be interpreting the Constitution consistent with those values, and obviously consistent with the Constitution. So we've got to gird up our loins, as they say, and speak loudly now.
When we hear these complaints about the judiciary being politicized, this is exactly the type of stuff that does it. When you threaten to pack the court because you don't like the fact that the previous administration filled vacancies and tilted the balance of the court toward a constitutionalist viewpoint, and so you're going to change you want to change the outcomes by putting politically minded individuals on the court. That, in my view, and I think I'm not the only one, I think actually even some liberals hold this view, that what you're doing is you are jeopardizing the legitimacy of the court in the minds of the American people, and justifiably so.
Yeah, Tony, if you kind of look through the American history, there was certainly an era when the executive branch was probably the most powerful, and maybe for a while the unions were, and maybe at one point Congress was. But I think if we reflect over the last 40, 50 years, the judicial branch has actually been the strongest and the most powerful entity in the nation. I think they're starting to get shoved to the side, though, by social media and biased media as well. But you're right. They've become way too politically active, and we need to get back to our roots.
Well, speaking of those roots, Senator Marshall, yesterday you made your maiden speech on the Senate floor. You talked about those values from which you have grown up with, that you grew up with in Kansas, and you talked about some of those things. But one of the things you also you brought up, you talked about one of your favorite paintings hanging on the Capitol Rotunda, that of George Washington. Briefly, just share with our listeners about that. I thought that was fascinating.
I try to do a Capitol tour once a week with folks from back home, and we do it late at night, and we stop in the Capitol Rotunda, and I talk about General Washington and President Eisenhower, and one of my favorite paintings in there, it is my favorite painting. It has President Washington. He's surrendering his commission. So the Revolutionary War is over with, and America thinks George Washington will be the first king for America. And they have the robes ready for him and a king's throne ready for him. But the painting shows the robes thrown off his shoulders and setting on the king's throne, that we would not have a monarchy, but instead we would have a republic. And, the lesson, and we kind of started off this conversation about power, about a power grab. Washington didn't grab for more power when he had the opportunity. Type of leaders we want in Washington. And right now we're seeing this left radical agenda is totally a power grab, whether it's, federalizing election laws, totally partisan legislation on COVID relief, packing the court, losing the filibuster. Those are all power grabs. Double the number of executive orders we've ever seen. So the Democrat Party is becoming more like exactly what President Washington didn't want us to become. They're trying to grab more power.
Well, speaking of that power, the latest, well, I can't say the latest. I mean, every 15 minutes we're seeing some other example of it. But what the president rolled out recently in his infrastructure bill, this monstrosity of a measure, $2 trillion plus, is that going to make its way through the Senate, given the fact that less than 10% of that money is actually going to go to infrastructure?
Well, they'll have to do it through budget reconciliation if it does, and which is feasible. That's the route they'll have to go. Budget reconciliation is the only way they can get something to pass on 50 votes plus the vice president's tiebreaker as well. And even as that, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are saying that it's a no-go as well. But I bet it'll be a challenge for us to stop it. But to your point, it is anything but an infrastructure bill. There's only $110 billion in this for roads and bridges, but there's $170 billion in there for electric car chargers, $300 billion in tax credits for buying electric cars as well. So this is really a Green New Deal and a grab your wallet, raise your taxes bill. It's anything but infrastructure.
Well, Dr. Marshall, I want to thank you for joining us today, and congratulations on your first speech there on the Senate floor. We look forward to many, many more speeches that you'll be making on behalf of faith, family, and freedom there in the United States Senate.
Tony, I enjoy working with you. Can't wait till I get to talk to you again.